Don't open that door, please. The words came out of nowhere, broken and desperate, like they didn't belong in a place as ordinary as a late-night diner in downtown Chicago. I remember freezing mid-step, holding a tray of coffee cups that suddenly felt too heavy for my hands. My name is Olivia Harper, and that night was supposed to be like any other closing shift. Clean tables, count tips, go home, sleep for a few hours before life started all over again. I was 26, balancing rent, student loans, and a future that always seemed one bill away from collapsing. The rain outside the glass windows blurred the neon lights into soft colors, and the world felt quiet in that exhausted way only night shifts understand. Then he walked in. I didn't notice him at first, not really. Just another late customer, except he wasn't dressed like one. Black suit, slightly disheveled, expensive but no longer perfect, like he had been running through more than just streets. He moved with urgency, not aggression, but urgency that made the air feel tighter around him. When our eyes met, I felt something I couldn't explain, like recognition without memory. He staggered slightly near the counter, and I instinctively stepped forward before I even understood why. That was my first mistake, or maybe my first choice. Please, he said again, quieter this time, like speaking too loudly might make something worse. His voice wasn't commanding like I expected from someone who looked like him. It was controlled, careful, almost restrained. I should have called someone, should have backed away, but instead I guided him toward the small storage hallway behind the kitchen. It wasn't bravery. It was instinct. The kind you don't question until later. Stay here, I whispered, opening the supply closet door and motioning him inside. He hesitated, just for a second, like he wasn't used to being helped without conditions. Then he stepped in. The hallway light flickered overhead, casting long shadows across stacked boxes and cleaning supplies. I locked the door softly behind him, my heart beating faster than it should have been for something that, logically, didn't make sense. That's when I heard it, the front bell above the diner door ringing again, followed by voices. Calm voices. Too calm. The kind that didn't belong to people just looking for food. I glanced toward the front counter. Two men in dark coats stood near the entrance, scanning the room like they already knew what they were searching for. My breath caught, but I forced myself to move normally, wiping down the counter as if nothing had changed. Table for two? I asked, my voice shaking just slightly at the edges. One of them smiled politely. Just looking for someone, he said. My hands tightened around the rack. Behind me, in the locked storage room, the man I had just hidden was silent. Too silent. And somehow, without understanding why, I knew that whatever was happening tonight wasn't going to end when my shift did. The second I saw them walk further inside, my instincts told me to act normal even though every part of me wanted to look toward the hallway where I had hidden him. I kept wiping the counter, pretending the late hour and exhaustion were the only things making my hands unsteady. The two men spread out slowly, their eyes moving across the diner like they were counting details instead of people. One of them stopped near the window, glancing outside at the empty street, while the other stayed closer to the counter, studying me with quiet attention that made my throat tighten. You said you were looking for someone, I repeated, forcing a small polite smile even though my voice felt thinner than usual. The man nodded once, his expression unreadable. A misunderstanding, he said calmly, as if the words had been rehearsed. Someone we were trying to locate may have passed through this area. I nodded like that made sense, even though it did not. I had worked enough late nights to know when conversations were not meant for people like me. But tonight, I could not afford to show hesitation. Behind me, I could feel the presence in the storage room like a pressure in the air, silent and waiting. I kept my movements steady as I reached under the counter, pretending to organize receipts. The clock above the kitchen door ticked loudly, each second stretching longer than it should have. The man near the window looked back toward the dining area again, his gaze lingering on the hallway leading to the kitchen. I followed his line of sight casually and said, "We are closing in about 10 minutes. If you are looking for someone, I have not seen anyone come in or out recently." My words felt practiced even though I had never rehearsed anything like this. The second man gave a slight nod, then glanced at his companion as if confirming something unspoken. "If he shows up," he said, "it is important that we know." I swallowed and nodded again, trying to appear cooperative without giving away anything I did not understand myself. After a long pause, The first man reached into his coat, not quickly, not threatening, but controlled, and pulled out a small card, placing it on the counter between us. "If you remember anything," he said quietly, "call this number." Then both of them turned toward the exit. I watched as they left without rushing, the bell above the door ringing softly as they stepped back into the rain. Only when they were gone did I allow myself to breathe properly again. My legs felt weak, but I stayed upright, staring at the glass door until their reflections disappeared completely into the streetlights outside. The diner felt suddenly too quiet, like the world had been holding its breath along with me. I glanced toward the hallway, my heart still unsettled, and slowly walked toward the storage door. My hand hovered over the handle for a second before I unlocked it carefully. When I opened it, the man inside looked up at me, his expression controlled but alert, as if he had been listening to every word through the walls. "They are gone," I whispered, unsure why I was even saying it to him like reassurance mattered. He did not move immediately, just studied me with an intensity that made me feel like I had stepped into something much larger than a late shift at work. "You should not have done that," he said quietly, his voice lower than before, steady but carrying weight I could not yet understand. I hesitated, unsure if he meant hiding him or something else entirely. "I could not just let them find you," I replied, almost instinctively. Something shifted in his expression then, subtle but undeniable, like my answer had complicated something he already understood about me. He stepped out of the storage room slowly, adjusting his jacket, and for the first time I realized he was not just tired or injured from running. He was calculating everything, including me. "What is your name?" he asked. I told him, and he repeated it once, as if testing how it sounded in a different world. Then he looked toward the front of the diner, where the door had just closed moments earlier, and said quietly, "Olivia Harper, you are now involved in something you were never meant to see." And even though I did not understand what that meant yet, I knew without question that my life had already changed the moment I opened that door. The moment he said my name like it carried meaning beyond a simple introduction, I felt something shift in the air between us, like the world had quietly tilted without asking for permission. "Olivia Harper." I repeated it in my own mind, trying to convince myself it was still just my name, still just a waitress working late shifts in Chicago, still just a life that made sense. But the way he looked at me made it feel like that version of me had already been set aside. The diner outside was empty now except for the glow of streetlights reflecting on wet pavement, and the sound of rain had softened into a steady rhythm against the windows. He stepped out of the storage room fully now, adjusting his jacket with controlled precision, as if even exhaustion had to obey structure in his world. I noticed then how carefully he moved, not rushed anymore, but still alert, like someone used to never fully relaxing. "You should not have opened that door," he said again, not as criticism, but as fact, like he was explaining gravity. I crossed my arms instinctively, trying to ground myself in something normal. "I did not exactly have a choice," I replied, glancing toward the front entrance where the two men had just left. "They were looking for you." He exhaled slowly, looking past me instead of directly at me for a moment, as if calculating distances, exits, and possibilities I could not see. "They were not just looking for me," he said quietly. "They were closing something I was not meant to leave behind." I did not understand what that meant, but I understood enough to know it was not something I should be involved in. I leaned against the counter, suddenly aware of how tired my body felt, like adrenaline was finally wearing off. "Then maybe you should leave," I said carefully. "Whatever this is, I do not want it in my life." He looked at me then, directly, and there was no anger in his expression, only something heavier, something closer to concern mixed with certainty. "It is already in your life," he said. "The moment you chose to help me." That sentence stayed between us longer than it should have. I looked down at the counter, at the small business card the men had left earlier, still sitting untouched like a reminder that choices had already been made without my permission. I picked it up and turned it over in my hand, but did not read it. "I did not choose anything," I said quietly, but even as I said it, I was not sure if it was true anymore. He moved toward the window then, looking outside into the empty street. "You will have to leave here tonight," he said after a pause. "This place is not safe for you anymore." I laughed once, short and disbelieving, because it sounded absurd. "I work here," I said. "I go home after closing. I sleep. I come back. That is my life." He turned back to me. Not anymore, he replied simply. There was no threat in his voice, only certainty. The kind of certainty that made denial feel useless instead of comforting. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The diner felt too small suddenly, like the walls had moved closer without permission. Then he stepped forward slightly, lowering his voice. If you come with me now, I can make sure you are not found again, he said. If you stay, you will be part of something you cannot see yet, but others already can. I stared at him, trying to find manipulation in his words, trying to find anything that would let me dismiss him as dangerous or delusional. But what I saw instead was exhaustion, focus, and something that felt like responsibility I had never asked to carry. My fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. I do not even know your name, I said finally. He paused, as if deciding whether that detail mattered anymore. Ethan Caldwell, he said, and somehow, hearing it made everything feel more real, not less. Outside, a car passed slowly in front of the diner, headlights sweeping across the windows before disappearing down the street. Ethan's eyes followed it briefly, then returned to me. You have about 5 minutes to decide whether your life stays the same, he said quietly, or whether it changes permanently. And in that moment, standing behind a counter in a half-empty diner with rain still falling outside, I realized I had already stopped believing my life would ever be simple again.